30 years ago, an oil tanker could sail through the Strait of Hormuz without a second thought. Today, that same strait is 70% empty, and the world's most powerful military is exchanging missile strikes with a country that may, I want to be very careful with that word, may let be days away from crossing the nuclear threshold. This is not a regional skirmish. This is not a proxy war. What is happening right now in March 2026 between the United States, Israel, and Iran is a civilizational inflection point. And I want to walk you through exactly what is happening, why it's happening, and where it leads. No diplomatic language, no hedging, just analysis. So let's start with what we actually know as of today, March 3rd, 2026. The United States, operating alongside Israel, has continued its missile campaign against Iranian territory. And look, this is no longer surgical strikes on nuclear facilities, okay? This is a systematic campaign targeting the military infrastructure, command centers, and logistics of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. That's a completely different level of operation. Iran has responded with strikes against Israel, but pay close attention to the details here. These are not the drone swarms or symbolic missile salvos we saw back in 2024. Iran has deployed a new heavy-class ballistic missile. Preliminary assessments point to the Khorramshahr 5, range up to 3,000 kilometers, carrying a potentially maneuverable warhead. And that changes the strategic picture fundamentally. The Strait of Hormuz, traffic is down 70%. 70%. If you want to understand what that number actually means for the global economy, roughly 20% of all traded oil passes through Hormuz. When that artery is even partially blocked, it's not just expensive gasoline in Europe, okay? It's a blow to Asian manufacturing, to global supply chains, to the financial stability of dozens of nations. Dozens. Then there's the attack on Saudi Aramco's refinery, the largest oil company on earth. And if you think Saudi Arabia will just sit on the sidelines after a direct strike on its crown jewel, you are mistaken. Riyadh is facing the most consequential decision it has had to make in decades, honestly. And finally, a magnitude 4.3 earthquake in southern Iran. Now, technically, seismic events are not unusual in that region, but colleagues in intelligence circles are not dismissing another explanation. An underground nuclear test at sub-kiloton yield produces exactly that seismic signature. We have no confirmation, but we also have no refutation. And that silence is loud. Okay, so now I'm going to say what no one in Washington, Tel Aviv, or Tehran actually wants to hear. On American strategy, the United States appears to be repeating, and this is frustrating to watch, repeating the same mistake it made in Iraq in 2003 and Libya in 2011. There is an excellent plan for destroying the enemy, and no plan whatsoever for what comes after. Missile strikes on Iran can destroy specific targets. They cannot destroy an idea. The Islamic Republic has survived 47 years precisely because external pressure strengthens its internal legitimacy. Every American missile that strikes Iranian soil is another 1,000 young Iranians walking into IRGC recruitment offices. And furthermore, Washington is catastrophically underestimating the nuclear calculus. The logic for Tehran is brutally simple, okay? Libya gave up its nuclear program and Gaddafi was killed. North Korea did not, and it still exists. Tehran has read the same book. Strikes don't deter, A nuclear breakout decision, they accelerate it. That's the part that keeps me up at night on Iranian strategy. Tehran is betting on escalation as a negotiating lever. That is a relatively rational strategy, but it carries an enormous risk of miscalculation. When you play at the edge, you risk going over it. Striking Saudi Aramco is no longer just a response to Israel, okay? It is a direct challenge to Saudi Arabia, to the entire Gulf, and indirectly to China, the largest buyer of Saudi crude. Beijing is silent, but Beijing is counting losses, and that is a very, very dangerous game for Tehran. On the international community, the UN is paralyzed. The Security Council is deadlocked. The European Union is issuing statements, not actions. Nobody in Geneva or Brussels is building a de-escalation corridor right now. And without that corridor, the conflict goes wherever its momentum carries it. Right now, that momentum is pointing in only one direction, up. Let's be direct about what is truly on the line here, because I think people underestimate the scope of this. Oil geopolitics. A 70% drop in Hormuz traffic is already a crisis for Asian economies. Japan, South Korea, India, all critically dependent on Gulf oil. If the strait remains partially closed for another 4 to 6 weeks, we are not talking about expensive gas in Europe. We are talking about a recessionary shock across East Asia with a domino effect on global markets. European energy prices are already climbing. And that is just the beginning, the nuclear threshold. This is the most dangerous question. I have colleagues who believe Iran is deliberately running out the clock, making its nuclear breakout decision under cover of a world distracted by conventional warfare. And if Tehran crosses that threshold, the regional order changes permanently. Saudi Arabia announces its own nuclear program within months. Turkey, Egypt, they follow. We get a nuclear Middle East within a decade. That is a scenario from which there is no return to normal. China and Russia, both are watching and waiting. Moscow benefits from rising oil prices, a financial buffer for its wartime economy. Simple as that. Beijing is uneasy. It buys Iranian oil in defiance of sanctions, but it also depends on regional stability. And if the United States becomes bogged down in the Middle East, the Taiwan Strait becomes significantly more vulnerable. Beijing understands this, and Beijing is incorporating it into its calculations every single day. American domestic politics. Congress is already asking, and look, these are fair questions. Where is the exit strategy? What does one day of this operation cost the American taxpayer if the conflict drags on without clear victories? We have seen what happens to presidential approval ratings in the middle of an open-ended military engagement. The political clock in Washington is ticking. I always tell my students, a good analyst does not predict the future. He maps possible futures. So, here are mine. Scenario 1. Controlled escalation. Probability, I'd say, around 45%. Both sides continue exchanging strikes but consciously avoid crossing certain red lines. Iran does not directly target American carrier groups. The United States does not go after the supreme leader. After 3 to 5 months, exhaustion on both sides, negotiations through intermediaries, probably Qatar or Oman. The result? A frozen conflict, partial restoration of the nuclear framework, Hormuz gradually reopens. Oil prices stabilize at 40 to 50% above pre-conflict levels. Painful, but manageable. Scenario 2, regional war. And this is the one I lose sleep over. Probability around 35%. One miscalculation and the situation escapes control. An Iranian missile kills over 100 American troops at a base in Iraq or Syria. Or a U.S. strike inadvertently kills the supreme leader. Or Israel delivers a blow that Tehran classifies as existential. In this scenario, Hezbollah opens a full second front from Lebanon. The Houthis devastate Saudi infrastructure. Iraqi Shia militias attack American positions across the region. The United States is pulled into a multi-front war. Duration, years, casualties, tens of thousands, cost, beyond calculation. Scenario 3, nuclear threshold, probability around 20%. Iran announces or demonstrates the possession of a nuclear weapon. This is the most dangerous scenario because it has no precedent in modern diplomacy. Nobody knows how Israel, the United States, and Saudi Arabia respond. There is a risk of a preemptive strike. There is a risk that the strike involves tactical nuclear weapons. This scenario is terra incognita. There are no maps. So, what do I want you to take away from this? First, this war already affects you. Through fuel prices, through supply chains, through your savings, and your economy. This is not something happening far away on a screen. Second, the diplomatic window is not yet closed, but it is closing. Every week without a negotiation process is a week in which escalation becomes more likely and de-escalation becomes harder. Third, and this is maybe the most important thing I can say today, the nuclear question cannot be deferred. If the international community does not find a way to offer Iran credible security guarantees without nuclear weapons, no amount of missile strikes will stop Tehran from crossing that threshold. None. I have spent nearly 2 decades analyzing these conflicts, and I will tell you honestly, this is more frightening than anything I have seen before. Not because catastrophe is inevitable, but because the people making these decisions are playing a game where the price of a single mistake is measured in millions of lives. Follow the news, but think critically. Ask questions. Demand answers. Thank you.